monthly for May. So our meetings have pretty much the same format. We have a formal agenda from 6 to 7, and I'll send that out right now in the chat. And usually the first half an hour, we have a guest speaker. And then the second half an hour, more or less, we have the various team leads talk to us about everything they've accomplished in the last month, which is quite incredible. And then ways for those of you who haven't quite plugged into Third Act, ways that you can plug in to all the really exciting things that we're doing to protect the climate and democracy. So before I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, I'd like to just say that I'm in unceded Nisenan land near downtown Sacramento, and I try to start these meetings with good news because we don't always get good news from the climate chaos world. So recently I was trying to catch up with my podcasts, and I listened to a podcast called Volts, and a really smart, engaging journalist is the host. And he happened to, instead of, he has a range of guests, but it's kind of unusual for him to have someone from the business world. And he actually had a man named Michael Liebrecht, who is in venture capital. And he started a company that ended up being bought out by Bloomberg, and he still runs that and does his own consulting. And what he spoke about during the podcast was 2 blogs that he had posted in the last few months. And it was called something like the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse for net zero. So basically what he goes through is 5 reasons why achieving net zero for carbon emissions will be harder than we think. And then part 2 was why achieving net zero for carbon emissions might just be inevitable. So he covers market forces and political trends and so on. And I'll put the link to the podcast in the chat. But just as one example, on the positive side of things, he was saying that the demand for materials for the transition isn't as much as we thought. So in the case of big batteries, like batteries for an EV, let's say you bought an EV, you'll buy one tomorrow. And that battery has a certain amount of lithium and other minerals that could possibly, or actually could definitely be recycled to make a new battery, say for another EV in 10 years. That new battery will use the same materials from, the old one that you've recycled, but it could be 2 or 3 times more efficient given the technology and the rapid rate of improvement in battery storage that we're seeing. So, sometimes we assume we have technology, but maybe we think that it's static, but in fact, there's some incredible advances. And I really, if you have an extra hour, if you're driving somewhere or you're stuck doing the dishes or something, I really encourage you to listen to that podcast with Michael Liebrecht. So without further ado, we're very fortunate to have a Third Act member, a former senior climate economist with the California Energy Commission and a lecturer right here at Sac State University, Pierre Duvert. And he's going to give us a short talk on climate science and then stick around for questions. So take it away, Pierre.
All right, let's see if I can get the screen share to work. And how does that look?
Great.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here. And I always love to talk about climate change. I've been the bulk of my career with the state of California, and able to put to use some of my academic training up at Humboldt State. I did biology and economics, and then at UC Davis I did the master's in economics. And the PhD they have there is environmental policy analysis. It's actually a very interdisciplinary program. program, part of their graduate group in ecology. So ended up being a very good fit for climate change. Well, I thought I'd provide a little bit of background or history. I'm not sure how much everybody in Third Act comes to this group with familiarity about sort of how we got to where we are in sort of climate policy and economics. There's, of course, the science has been building for a long time, but the policy and the economics is a bit more interesting and a bit more current. But it really started in 1988 when Dr. James Hansen testified to the U.S. Senate about the greenhouse effect and warning that, you know, the emissions that we're putting up from fossil fuels is warming the atmosphere. That was 36 years ago. So we've known about it for quite a while. This is a graphic that kind of shows how much we've been deviating from the average temperature between 1900 or 1901 and 2020. And so you can see at the zero is you're right on the average. And in the early 1900s, we had a lot of colder temperatures that the global average temperature was, you know, 1 or 2 degrees below that roughly 120-year average. But then you can see we did have some pretty warm years that were up to 2 degrees. The red lines, you know, in the 30s and 40s were warmer than the average. But you can really see starting from about 1980 on is that we're just steadily above that average. And so temperature wise, you know, it's pretty clear the pattern that we have. There have been some big events along the way since that 1988 sort of initial warning to our leaders in Washington, D.C. We had, if some of you may have heard of the Rio Earth Summit, it was in 1992. That kind of put environmental issues on the global agenda. There's a couple of key treaties that came out of that. One of them was created the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. We had Bush Sr. was the president at the time, and got the United States to agree with 150 other nations, also creating things like the Convention on Biodiversity. Many of you have probably heard of the Kyoto Protocol that the US didn't want to ratify because it was only putting binding emission reductions on developed countries and industrialized countries, not on sort of some of the emerging economies like China and India. And so that there was some of the rationale for not ratifying that Kyoto Protocol, but it did get some commitments in agreement to cut some emissions based on anthropogenic or human warming. There was about 37 industrialized countries that had targets. This is more when I had my start with the Energy Commission. I got there in 2001. I was sort of the first full-time climate policy person in 2001 at the Energy Commission. And that they had been the locus for doing a lot of the research in the 90s. I think the first sort of scientific report for California on climate change was, how's it going to affect the water supply? How's it going to affect agriculture? That was late 80s, early 90s that those studies started. So not a lot happening under Gray Davis. We did have some initial efforts. If you've heard of Fran Pavley, she got an automobile greenhouse gas rule going. I think that was around 2002, 2003. That was sort of the first big piece of legislation for California. But Schwarzenegger took over for Gray Davis, and he was amazing. We got Assembly Bill 32, if you're familiar with that, AB 32 passed. That was sort of the first really big piece of legislation to get California moving on climate change. It was, I mean, we clearly see that it wasn't as much of a partisan issue back then, where you've got Republicans and Democrats in power supporting action on climate change. You probably all have seen Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore, of course, won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, along with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're the ones that do the big national, global assessment of climate science and emissions, and they do that about every 4 years or so. This was Assembly Bill 32. I mentioned that was in 2006, also when Schwarzenegger was in, and that required California. It's sort of our first shot at having emission reduction targets. Try to get back to 1990 level of emissions by the year 2020. And then we set some emissions caps for large emitting sectors like the oil refineries and the power plants. And that started in about 2012, which is not that long ago. And then you probably all heard Gavin Newsom, this is much more recent in 2020, saying that we want to try and have all of our new vehicle sales be electric or hydrogen, be zero emission vehicles. That's a big lift, but again, another big step where California is taking a leadership position saying we are going to get off fossil fuels. It's going to be a tall order to try to get that by 2035. A little on the science. I teach natural resource economics and energy economics. Students are kind of confused about why can it be really cold and really hot. And the climate science is that extremes get more extreme with the climate variability part of climate change. So it's both changing and getting more variable. So we can have really cold snaps. I don't know if you heard about back in Texas a couple of winters ago, they froze all their natural gas pipes and lost power. They tried to blame it on renewable power, but it was really frozen natural gas pipes that was the problem for Texas. They weren't expecting a really cold snap to come through and weren't prepared for it. But this is what we're really going to see more of, is like the record heat wave in 2020. This is where that Death Valley got to 125 degrees. LA was 121 degrees, which was a record for that area. San Francisco Bay was in the hundreds. So Missy, it would be a little different than when you were there during this heat wave.
Obvious.
This is kind of another way to look at sort of the annual temperature changes from the mean. So it's again, just similar to that prior graphic that I showed you. But 2023 was the hottest month ever on record. I'm not sure when the first thermometer was made, when we started, being able to have mechanical devices measure temperature, because prior to thermometers, they didn't have any real way to measure the temperature of anything. But we've now, of course, gotten into satellites, and NASA, they can send buoys out into the ocean and it sinks and it gets temperatures and dissolved oxygen, all these different readings. The amount of information that's coming in now on the global climate is amazing. These are 4 different data sets. All of them are saying the same kind of thing, that really since the 1970s or so, we've had a steady rise in the average global temperature. One's NASA's, one's in the UK, the Hadley Center, NOAA, and Berkeley. So it helps to have multiple data sources kind of pointing to the same thing. It's sort of what's called convergent validity, or gives you more confidence in it. This graphic just shows a little bit about what's happening with heat waves, how many heat waves we're having per year. You can see in the last 20 years, it's starting to rise, the number of heat waves we have, then how long those heat waves are getting longer, and then really exactly how hot it gets, all starting to climb. This is another way to kind of look at modeling of what we anticipate to be the number of extreme heat days. And so you can see after about 2020, we're right here in the middle. It's a steady rise in the number of extreme heat days that we're expect to see. Anybody know why the atmospheric CO2 bounces up and down like it does? It's definitely going up, but why do you think it bounces up and down? In between
growth.
Exactly.
But
Most of the vegetation's in the northern hemisphere. And so when it's springtime, it's pulling all the CO2 out of the atmosphere when it's springtime in the northern hemisphere. And that's the downward slope you see. And then when fall, all the leaves fall off, and then that CO2 quickly decays and goes back, the CO2 jumps back up. So that's just sort of, the northern hemisphere growing with photosynthesis and then giving it back. But the concern, of course, here is that steady climb. This is a measurement of energy-related fossil fuel emissions globally. And you can see where we've come from in the 1900s to maybe 5 gigatons a year to just recently we hit what looks like 38 or so gigatons. So a really significant increase, most of it really picking up in the 60s, 70s. And we're adding a lot of CO2 to the atmosphere from our fossil fuel consumption. Thought I'd just show you where we are on some of the different sectors. Everybody knows what the dip is here in 2020, right? And one of the scary things about that is that we really shut our economy down. And so you would think that the dip in emissions would be enormous, but that's all we got was the dip right there, from about 2,000 million metric tons down to maybe 1,600 million metric tons. So I think this goes to kind of the concern about how hard it's going to be to bring down these fossil fuel emissions. Probably the most interesting one here is the power sector. Anybody know the reason that one's been declining? The power sector was the largest, close to 2,500 back in 2005.
Solar and wind?
That renewables is going to be more towards the tail end here. But what happened right before the big boom in solar? You guys heard of hydraulic fracturing or fracking? We had a natural gas boom is what we had. And so natural gas prices just plummeted. And so there was a big swap coal for natural gas. And so that's what's steadily been bringing us down, is that we're building less coal plants, we're shutting more coal plants down, but we're replacing it with a lot of natural gas, which is less carbon intensive. So it's bringing our electricity GHG footprint down. But natural gas, of course, still has CO2 emissions and methane, fugitive methane from pipeline leaks and production and all that. California, our big issue is transportation. It's not as big in other parts of the country, but California, it's a huge part of our emissions. So that transition is really pretty critical to get off of gasoline and diesel. Sea level rise, California being a coastal state, it has a lot of concern about that, averaging about 3.5 millimeters per year. It's been a pretty steady rise, and predicted to rise about 10 inches by 2050. That's sort of an intermediate guess compared to where the ocean levels were in 2000. And then there's some big estimates down the road in 2100 maybe that it could go anywhere from 3 feet to 7 feet sea level rise, which would cause all kinds of problems. This is just a 4-foot sea level rise in San Francisco Bay. And you can see that the San Francisco International Airport goes underwater with a 4-foot sea level rise. We'd lose a lot of the bay. We're all pretty aware of what's happening with California wildfires. You can see 2011 sort of, how many just in acres burned compared to 2020, of course, was really bad. But we've got a pretty steady increase. And so part of that is droughts. Extended, longer droughts are going to make a lot of the vegetation drier. We've got trees dying. We've got pathogens that are taking out a lot of our trees. So there's a lot more dead wood in the forest. And so we're getting much more intense fires in addition to the numbers of acres burned. This, again, just another graphic to kind of show the areas burned. I think this one's for US. And you can see that there's a steady increase. And it's the same in the Rockies. It's the same up in Canada, British Columbia. A lot of fuel in these forests that are burning. And part of it's because of bark beetles, because we don't have the really cold temperatures up in Alaska and Canada. So the bark beetles are killing a lot more trees. And then, there's a lot more fuel for the fires. This is just a look at some of the droughts and sort of what percentage of California is in drought. And so you can see the drought that was 2012 to 2016 was a big one, where just a huge chunk of the state, 80% of it or more, was in sort of extreme drought conditions. So that's a big challenge for California. Endangered species, this is sort of national level, but a lot of concern for species going extinct. We haven't had a lot of success in getting endangered species off the endangered species list, but a lot of the biologists are all saying these numbers are going to increase steadily as we have increases in extreme weather and warmer temperatures. Just a couple more slides. One is the US commitments. President Obama set a U.S. target to try to reduce our GHGs in the U.S. 26 to 28% below the 2005 level by 2025. And then we have a more recent target that President Biden set to try to reduce 50 to 52% below 05 by the year 2030. So that's a pretty aggressive national target that we have right now to basically cut our GHGs in half from the levels they were in 2005 in just 6 years from now. And the last slide I've got, just to let you know that California also is a leader in adaptation planning. There's always kind of this push and pull between, do we spend all of our resources trying to reduce emissions, or do we spend some resources trying to lessen the impacts of the changes that we know are coming? Answer is we're going to have to do both. A lot of areas are having to adapt out of necessity because of rising sea levels or storm surge eroding, coastlines. We're seeing all kinds of flooding events because you're getting record rainfalls in short amounts of time. So for a variety of reasons, a lot of local governments now recognize they really have to get into adaptation planning. And there's starting to be some really good tools to help particular local governments, but and others interested in what can we do to adapt to climate change. And with that, I went pretty fast, but hopefully you're able to follow most of that and found it interesting.
Wow, that was amazing, Pierre. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have a few minutes for questions. Maybe, I think if you want to raise your virtual hand, just go to reactions and click that. And it looks like Barbara has already raised her hand. So Barbara's first.
Thanks, Pierre. I had a question about one of your earlier slides.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but if my recollection is it was by 2035, there will be a conversion away from all gasoline driven, or I assume diesel as well, vehicles.
Yeah,
But I just
internal
wondered if you could
combustion
speak-
engine. Yeah.
Any kind of combustion engine,
Yeah,
diesel
the internal
or gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's my question.
Just new vehicles, new vehicle sales.
New vehicles. Okay,
Yeah.
so my question is, what are the issues and what is the planning and thinking behind how you will address that for trucks and farm equipment?
Energy Commission, where I worked for a bunch of years, has been pushing a lot of research for heavy duty electric vehicles. Of course, we've tried to get buses to get off of diesel and go to natural gas, so the CNG buses. Now you probably have seen sometimes electric buses. So there is heavy duty. It's a little more challenging, especially because the battery technology, the batteries are pretty heavy. And so if we get these improvements in like solid state batteries, they're going to be potentially a step above where a lot of the lithium, technology batteries are now. That can make a big impact in like tractor trailers, that big rigs going electric. Hydrogen is also a more good energy source for things like 18-wheeler trucks, but you've got to be able to make that hydrogen in a sustainable way. So right now they a lot of times just do it off of natural gas, which ends up having CO2 emissions. But if we get extra renewables, like right now, we at times have to actually turn off our solar panels in the springtime, and because we don't have enough demand for it, and we don't have the utility scale battery storage for it. So we're just literally shutting off some solar power and it's the free electricity. And if we could use that to create hydrogen as a sort of a very green hydrogen or sustainable hydrogen, that also is a good energy source for heavy duty vehicles.
So just to follow up super quick, what I hear you saying then is the 2035 deadline is probably not realistic for some of these bigger vehicles, that you're looking at 2045 or whatever. Am I right?
Yeah, Yeah, that target is for passenger vehicles. Yeah, and maybe light trucks. So that SUVs, small pickups, and then regular passenger cars. And it is just for new vehicles. So it's going to take a long time for all of the gasoline and diesel vehicles. They'll still be
Yeah.
around. That gives us a little bit of time to get the public charging stations going, to get charging into apartment buildings, because there's going to be it's expensive to retrofit and get EV charging into like existing apartment buildings.
Thank you.
Great question. Hi, Michael, you're next.
Yeah, hi. Early in maybe in the middle of your presentation, you had a slide about some greenhouse gas emission targets from maybe a couple decades ago even. And then near the end of your presentation, you had a slide from, I guess, Obama's years about some targets for 2025. And I don't believe in either case you said how close or how far we are from actually meeting those targets.
Yeah, I had the early California ones, and I think we met our 2020 target for California, but we haven't met the 2035 target yet. We've got what's called the scoping plan. I don't know if you've heard of the California Air Resources Board. They've got the big statewide strategy for how to get down to these target levels and how much we can use cap and trade, where they cap the big emitting sectors and let them trade, but ratchet the cap down. There's offsets, which are other kind of projects that reduce emissions. And we're a long ways from becoming carbon neutral, though. That's for sure. I think, Mike, if that's your kind of key point is, when can we get to sort of carbon neutral? And I don't know when we're going to be able to. I think we're quite a long ways, given I think we're currently over 400 million metric tons of CO2 a year in California, or CO2e equivalent. And we're going to still be having gasoline and diesel vehicles for a long time. The majority of our electricity production is natural gas, which backs up the wind and solar when we don't have enough wind and solar. So I think some of these targets are likely to slip. I've seen other states' targets slipping for sure.
Okay, that was my question, Michael. Lori has her hand up.
Yes, sorry. Did I unmute myself? Yes.
Yeah.
I have all kinds of things showing on my screen. My concern about adaptation is that there are certain levels that we can't adapt to. And every species has its own tolerance and adaptation levels. So we're going to be seeing novel forests. We'll be seeing, because some species will survive and others won't, and some will move. When people talk about adaptation, I'm really concerned that they think that we can adapt to anything. And yes, maybe we can adapt to 125 degrees, but what about 140 degrees or 160 degrees? The coming changes, there are so many things that we don't know, but what we do know scares me to death. And I recognize that we do have to work on adaptation, but knowing that we can't adapt to everything means that we really need to be more serious about cutting emissions and changing those things that are causing climate change, such as a capitalist system that requires ever increasing growth, and all those connections to climate change is just so complicated. And so when you talk about cutting emissions, that's just such a small part of the big picture. So I'm giving it back to you to to make me feel better.
I would agree with you that we have to have that focus on reducing emissions or mitigation for sure. because that CO2 is up there for hundreds of years, if not thousands. And so we just have to stop emitting. We got to stop building new coal power plants, and we got to leave with the good carbon storage that we have, which is coal is the best carbon storage there is, and leave it in the ground. That's for sure. But the real places that need to adapt, and it's really unfair, is a lot of the low-lying like island nations and other countries that don't have the resources to adapt, but are getting hit with a lot of the biggest impacts, like sea level rise. Now, it's not as bad in California, but we have to stop, rebuilding and in places, and we keep bailing out and rebuilding the same place, and then it gets destroyed by another extreme storm. So we're, that's an adaptation, is to not make bad investments that climate's going to end up, costing more when you keep rebuilding in the same place.
And also, if you have wars that destroy all the structures and infrastructure, and then you have to rebuild, we need to have new ways of doing things, of solving conflicts. Climate change is going to require everything to change.
Agreed.
Okay, I don't see any more e-hands, and if you raise your virtual hand, you'll come to the front of the queue. So I think I'll ask the last question. So Pierre, you teach at Sac State, so these are young people who have their whole lives ahead of them, and I know they're probably trying to learn important economic formulas and so on, but they must think about what will Sacramento, or what will the earth be like 20, 30, 40 years from now? Did they ever ask you about that? And what do you say to them to kind of keep them a little bit hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time on climate change in both natural resource economics class, and I just taught energy economics. I hadn't taught that in over a decade. And so this time I required them to find news articles 6 different times throughout the semester and write about it. And they found great articles. And I could definitely tell by their writing. They had to write a page and a half on each one, explain what the article is about, why is the issue important, and then what do they think are sort of the best solutions. So many of them were around electric vehicles, and recognition about a lot of the challenges with coal and air pollution. And yet I think a lot of them are pretty clued in on that we need to change. But a lot of them also, I think, are not as familiar. And so they either their news sources aren't very good in terms of them, hearing from the right types of sources about what some of these big issues are. And so these classes end up being somewhat new to them, and they end up being a little more aware. They kind of knew that we had high-speed rail and that might get people out of cars and airplanes, but they have never really looked into it. We may never get it at the pace it's going, but so the interest is there. But yeah, I think I'd say at least half the class is exposed to, environmental type issues in these. And I'm always, thrilled to have, there's at least always, a dozen or so that just get very into it and want to know more, which isn't always the case with economists.
Thank you. Well, thanks for your teaching at Sac State, and for your really terrific talk. And it looks like you might be able to stay around for the after party at 7. If you have to go, we understand. But if folks have more questions for Pierre, he might stay. So we need to move on to the rest of our agenda, which I posted in the chat. If you can't see it, just say something and I'll just resend it. But we use the second half of our meeting to let folks know about what our various teams are doing. That's really where the action happens in Third Act. For example, I belong to a few of the teams, and I was at a banking action last week, and the week before I was talking to a legislator in Elk Grove, and there are just all kinds of ways you can get involved. So our first team is climate finance. We're going to kind of do this on the fly a little bit. Maureen, do you have anything to share about your team?
Oh gosh, I'm here with my grandson, so I'm not going to start my video. Climate finance. Oh my goodness. Let's see. The summer of heat. I think everyone has heard about that from Pat. And I think a lot of our focus is on the summer of heat. And there are several of us going from several of us going from Third Act for the first week, the Elders Day. And you know, I'm sort of on the spot right now. And I have my
You're doing
grandson here. So yeah. And of course, ensure our future is something that my heart is in, and I'm going to be speaking to the this is what we did group on Wednesday, their climate core. So if anyone's involved with that or wants to have a link to that to hear me do that talk again, I'll be happy to do it. So I'm sorry, I'm sort of flat-footed on this. We're working hard, and we're really focused on summer of heat. So thank you for the opportunity, Diane.
You're welcome. We would have loved to see your grandson.
Oh,
But
no.
if you could put maybe the registration link or, you know, regarding your talk on Wednesday, I think, you know, some people might want to hear more about that.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. I'll
Okay.
be happy to do that.
Thanks, Maureen. That was great. You know, Third Act was started in part by some folks who are actually my age. And back when we were in college, we did all kinds of things to convince our universities to divest from companies that did business with South Africa, which at the time was an apartheid state. And once American companies and British companies stopped investing in South Africa, it really was the beginning of the end. Of course, many, many more things had to happen, but it really put the South African economy under a lot of stress. And so, you know, these many years later, as we're all nearing retirement age, Bill McKibben and others started Third Act in part to divest from fossil fuels and also from insurance companies that insure fossil fuel companies. So that's a lot of what we do. And I know a lot of you have heard about Summer of Heat, but for those of you who haven't, just type in summerofheat.org. It's a 12-week series of actions in New York City against Wall Street, and they have 4 demands, one of which is to immediately stop lending and insuring fossil fuel companies. And we'll be having some local actions too. So we'll talk about that maybe more in the after party and in the newsletter, the fabulous newsletter that we have. So Ruth is here to tell us about a really interesting aspect of divestment, and that's an initiative to divest the state pension funds. So Ruth, can you update us on 252 and the recent CalPERS announcement?
Yeah, well, there was CalPERS actually put out a press release today saying that they will be voting against all the proposed board members of Exxon. So just a little background for people that don't know this. Exxon filed a lawsuit against 2 of its activist investors. And even though the activist investors dropped the proposed resolution, Exxon continued with the suit and refused to drop the suit. So we have done a fair number of actions with a group called Common Good, which is a great big coalition of lots of groups calling on PERS to exit from Exxon. And while they haven't exited from Exxon, this was a really big move. PERS apparently has owns about $1 billion. It's a very large shareholder of Exxon. PERS, for those that you don't know, is the largest pension fund in the country and in one of the top 10 pension funds in the world. So, PERS's action sends a strong message to the Exxon board and also to other pension funds. And they quote saying they acted because it judges the company's campaign against the two investor groups to be, quote, designed to punish investors who dare to speak truth to power. So it's a great first step. We're very happy they did this. The president of PERS said that they don't intend to divest, because divestment, then they don't have a seat at the table. So we have a lot of work to do on that front. The bill is SB 252 that calls on PERS and STRS to divest from fossil fuels. And I just, like, literally 10 minutes ago, got a notice that there's actually going to be a hearing May 29th at 9:30. It's going to be a joint hearing of both the Senate and Assembly Public Employees Retirement System Committee. And so that's going to give that's actually a hearing that was delayed. It was supposed to be in March. And so if you are a PERS or STRS member, we would love, love, love you to come and testify. We have a unique ability here in Sacramento. During COVID, the legislature allowed testimony. It was terrific from all over, and it was videoed, and you could call in, etc. They're no longer doing that. So the only people that the only way you can testify at this point is actually showing up. And so the more people that can come at 9:30, May 29th, would be terrific. And particularly if you are a PERS member or a STRS member. And I know we have a lot of both here. And so I can put my email in the chat, and you can email me for more information. We're going to have talking points and all sorts of things. And my guess is the more people there are, you won't even have to say much. You can come and say, I'm a PERS and STRS member, and I think they ought to divest. So also some really interesting information. We heard from a top economist who works on climate financing, had some terrific graphs. We can maybe put a link in the newsletter for you, which will show that over the last 10 years, with the exception of the event because of Ukraine, there's been a huge decline in returns from fossil fuels, and versus an increase in the S&P 500. So the graph just literally goes like this. Boop, I can't, So there's a huge gap. And so fossil fuels are not returning the types of investments, the type of returns that it did in the past. And in fact, it's really hurting the returns of PERS. And so that's the point we're really trying to make, is it's not only good for the climate, but it's really important for our pension system that they divest, because the returns are not what we need at the moment. So if anybody has any questions, let me know. And my gmail.com. Yeah, and there's my link.
Thank you, Ruth. That was excellent. And there was a lot of email traffic about this exit Exxon stuff. So it's good to get the latest. And as far as the hearing on May 29th, I know some of you we have listed as PERS or STRS members, but not everybody. So please do write Ruth, or you can put your name in the chat. what we'll probably do is get together at 9 o'clock just to say hi and make sure we all know each other, and then we'll get over to the hearing room by 9:30. So, you won't have to do it alone. We'll be there with you. This is really, really, really exciting. Okay, so let's move on to senior. Mary Ann is here.
Hello. Yeah, Senior to Senior has been working really hard this academic year, 23-24, and we have been improving our numbers over the last 2 years that we've been in the schools. We've gone from registering 600 to this year we'll be having registered over 1,000 students. We have a date coming up this Thursday at Bella Vista High School in Fair Oaks, and we'll be visiting 6 different classrooms for registering seniors in their government classes there. And thanks to our many volunteers who are brave and come out, and we have scripts that we follow to give the students a pep talk, and then to fill out the registration form. And so we have a good, thriving group, and anyone interested in looking at doing this for the next fall, beginning academic year 24-25, will be definitely making a huge push in early August and September to get those schools online. They'll have all new, a fresh crop of seniors to register. And so we're trying to hit as many as we possibly can, possibly 30 schools in the fall, to be able to make the election in November be something that is much more filled with youth vote. That being said, recent evidence, hearing from different protests and so on regarding the war in Gaza, we don't know if those students are actually going to be in favor of voting for Biden because they're unhappy with him, but it's not necessarily our ability. We can't predict that necessarily, but we're hoping that just bringing the horses to water will have an impact and they will vote for him rather than the alternative. And it'll make a difference for our next 4 years. So if you have any interest, I'll put my name and email in the chat. And please let me know if you'd like to add into our volunteer list, and we'll get you up and running for next fall. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mary Ann. It looks like Barbara has a question for you.
Okay, sure.
Thanks, Mary Ann, for all that you do on getting together the seniors to seniors. I've participated a little bit and I
Yes,
really
you have.
enjoy that effort. It's really great being able to interact with some of the high schoolers.
Yeah,
My
well, we
question
couldn't do without you, so I thank you.
My question is regarding the logistics of the fall. I don't know what the dates are for cutoff for starting different grades in this area. Of the seniors who are of the young people who are seniors in the fall, how many of them are likely to be eligible to vote in the November election, and how quickly can those registrations get turned around so that those people would be able to vote if they are eligible?
Okay, well, that's a good question. The senior enters normally at age 17, turning 18 sometime between that point and the June of the following year. Some people may be 18 or they will be 17. And in that case, if they're 17 by November, if they're 18 by November 5th, they will be receiving a ballot in late October, a mail-in ballot. If they're not 18, but it's possible that they are. There are late entries into senior year, and there are students who may have skipped, been held back a year. There's all kinds of different reasons. So it's possible. We just want to make the youth as aware as possible of the election that's coming up, and they can also speak to their brothers and sisters who are older and really encourage them to
Their
vote,
parents, yeah.
and their
And
parents.
how long does it take when you get something to the registrar's office to get a registration card then out or make eligible those individuals? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, if we are there by the middle of October, they will turn it around. The last date to register is usually the 21st of October.
Okay,
And then there's still the ability to register at a polling site on the day of voting if you are
Okay.
eligible. And so they can also go down to the office in downtown Sac to register. But the last date to have a mail-in ballot and be registered for that is the 21st of October.
thank you.
So we'll be, doing these registrations. Some of the schools go back to school as early as August 8th. And some of them actually don't go back until after Labor Day. So it just depends on that school district. And we have 4 or 5 school districts that we're dealing with. So that makes a difference. But that being said, we'll just try to influence as many students as we can
Yeah,
and
sure.
get them in.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. Okay, the next report is by the Connections and Actions team. I saw Gooley earlier.
Hey, I'm ready.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Connections and Actions team has been doing a lot of fun things and important things, I think, with the help of some of the other groups. We have this month 4 different postcard parties that have been planned. Mishi just had one on the 14th. So these are where you get together on a weeknight, and for a couple hours we write postcards that try to get folks who are already either environmental groups or folks who are Democratic leaning but not necessarily steady voters, and we write postcards and send them out. And I think the other team, which is the Get Out the Vote team, they have been doing a lot of great work with that. I just wanted to mention it in case they're not going to be talking. And we do have some coming up this month. Linda has been really leading the effort. She has 3 planned this month. So if you're interested in this kind of thing where you get together and write postcards, I'm going to put my name in the chat with my email. But Linda's got one. She's in the Land Park area. There's one coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. and she usually either feeds you or gives you some sort of a wonderful snack or lunch. And the next one is also May 25th. The one after that is May 25th at 2 p.m. So we've had also our focus about registering. I worked in jail till I retired a couple years ago, and so we found out that there's a the Third Act San Francisco group had been reaching out to parolees to get them registered. So I've been looking into doing that here, and we have a group now. If anyone has worked in jail before or is interested in getting, because what's happening is that so many of the people who are in jail actually are able to vote, but the voting has been abysmal. And so we met already with the Sacramento County Elections Office, and next we're meeting with the sheriff to really enhance the voting, because it's possible majority of people, there's a lot, like there were about 900 folks who could have voted in the last election, and they only about 14 voted. So we want to improve that. So if you're interested in that kind of work, again, I'll put my name in the chat. Then the next event, I'm not sure if Catherine, if you want to talk about it. If not, I'm happy to give a summary about it. We just had a bank action organized by Pat and Raylene and a bunch of other folks, including Maureen, and it was very successful. You've seen the picture of it in the newsletter, and we're going to be having another one coming up June 13th. And this one is going to be the same kind of thing where it's a green action, meaning that there's no risk of getting arrested. We just walk in and a group of folks basically go into the bank and read an indictment of the last one was about Citibank and its involvement in funding things that cause environmental injustice. And we read a statement, and then there's some chanting going on. We unfurl a banner, and then we leave, and then we basically sing chants and songs outside. And the last one, the bank manager said, I have a 1-year-old and thanked us for doing this. And she says, I hope that you can get the CEO to change because I believe in what you're doing. So we'd love to have more people. The next one is going to be very fun because Kathleen has been organizing it, and basically she well, we're planning on having a rocking chair rebellion. So the same kind of thing that where people go inside the bank, but there'll be a team outside with rocking chairs, not blocking the door, but right in front of the doors to the bank with decorated rocking chairs. And we're going to be kind of the theme of grandparents and grandfolks trying to protect the future generations. So we'd love your help in that. And then let's see, the other thing is about the whole summer of heat. It's kind of modeled after the summer of freedom summer in the for basically the human rights. Sorry, I get nervous. Human rights and civil rights actions in the 60s. And so it's going to be in New York, but we hope to have supporting actions here in Sacramento as well. And we'd love your help there. It's actually designed to go from June, I think it's June 10th all the way through August 31st, which is 12 weeks. And we are already starting to connect with other groups that we want to cooperate with and collaborate with, which the first one is Fridays for Future. So if anybody's interested in any of that, I'll put my name in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of ways to get involved. Okay, I know time's running short, but we have two more quick reports. The first one from Barbara, who's with the new Get Out the Vote team.
Okay, I'll be super quick. My partner, Karen Randalls, couldn't make it this evening. She's out of town. Basically, we continue to have parties. Goalie mentioned a bunch of them. And there's many others that are going on in the region. We estimated that we had around 700 postcards written in the past month to 6 weeks, something like that. That's just an estimate. We have 2 new groups that are being formed, one in Davis and one in Curtis Park. And if there's anybody here that's interested in participating in these parties, Goalie put her name in the chat, so you could contact her, and I'll put my name as well. And please email me, and we can hook you up with a effort that's going on in your neighborhood. And over time, we hope to expand that work to do phone banking and or canvassing. But I'll just leave it at that for right now.
Thanks a lot, Barbara. You and Karen have really started with a bang, and we're so grateful for everything you're doing. Let's wrap it up with Faith, who is leading the writers group.
Hello, everybody. The writers group is getting a little bit of a slow start since I'm new myself. Now we're going to have a meeting this coming Thursday, and we'll see, who is going to be more active. We have not done much outside of the letters that were requested in support of SB 252. But Luke said that there's a list somewhere of other legislation that we are supporting. So I'm going to take that to the group on Thursday. And we'll just see. We'll see what people want to do. We'll see, you know, what the level of interest is, and, you know, the different things that Third Act is doing.
Thanks so much, Faith. Yeah, there's a real need for writers. We need people who can write letters to the editor. We'll probably need some op-eds drafted for Summer of Heat. Just, you know, all kinds of, we just want to make use of everyone's talents and skills and interests. So it sounds like a great meeting, Faith.
We'll see.
It's 7:03. This formally concludes our, you know, the agenda that I sent out.